This is often regarded as the everyman. Many adults watching something like this will often see themselves in the character's shoes, spending most of their days in an office, dealing with the everyday struggles that come with what is usually perceived as a dreary life, yet very commonplace in our society. While it doesn't occasionally occur, there are fictional characters created that are meant for those people to connect with. Nowadays, it is a popular genre on television and can sometimes be found in movies, but before the time when people were in the offices of the town of Pawnee, Dunder Mifflin, and Initech, there was Dilbert.
Yeah, I think it is safe to say that I would not be considered the kind of everyman that you would see working at an office. I mean, look at me. I'm deliberately dressed up like this in front of the camera for thousands of people to see online to watch me talk about cartoons. Why would any regular person want to do this? But anyways, there was a time when Dilbert was considered the greatest pop culture icon in the office space. Like, back during his prime, whenever you would go into an office, any office, there was always at least that one or few cubicles out there that would have someone put up a Dilbert comic strip or a few Dilbert comic strip that they would have hanging on their wall that they would look at it and say, oh yeah, that situation is totally relatable. I can totally feel on that. But that pretty much goes to show that Dilbert definitely was at one point the voice of the office worker, and that voice came out of the mind of Scott Adams.
Yes, believe it or not, before Adams sacrificed his dignity and reputation to become a far-right troll on Twitter spewing out conspiracy theories that seem like only a maniac would think up and unironically believe, he actually had a life, and a pretty good one too. Inspired by his experience working at a bank and at Pacific Bell, Dilbert gradually grew from being a doodle he'd draw in his office and at meetings to becoming his own syndicate comic strip starting in 1989. Following afterwards, Dilbert turned into an icon by tapping into a market that possibly no other comic strip ever explored before. Where other comics were all about funny animals, families, and cultural satire, Dilbert was a comic strip primarily for the office worker. It wasn't until 1999 when Adams met with one of the Seinfeld writers, Larry Charles, to bring Dilbert into the world of animation, thus starting a new chapter in the legacy of the cartoon engineer. And if you look at the success of Garfield and Friends, it should be easy to transition from comic strip to cartoons, right?
It looks easy because they're so good at it. If you try to do that job without the proper training, you're dead meat.
One thing that I will confess honestly is that, believe it or not, as a kid, I actually used to watch the Dilbert cartoon back when it was on TV when the reruns would air during the beginning to the mid-2000s. Now, I know that's a pretty weird fact to say, and I will say right now that this is not the kind of show that kids should watch. Nothing too vulgar or anything. It's just that this is the kind of series where the grand majority of jokes will just fly over their heads anyways, so the kids will just be watching it and mostly not understand whatever they're seeing. But I will say, in my defense, back when I was a kid watching it, it was pretty much the only cartoon that was on TV early, like before going to school. So it wasn't like there was anything else that I would be watching anyways at that time. But alright, going back to Dilbert though, one thing I just want to go and clarify, to give you a bit of a perspective of where I'm coming from with this review, is that I honestly have never really read any of the Dilbert comic strips, but considering of what I have admitted with my history with the series, this will be a little bit of a nostalgia trip for me. So yeah, I am older and I have much more of an understanding in the world, but part of this will be returning to an old friend after so many years. But with all that said though, there is just one question remaining before we do get started on this review. What is this Dilbert series all about?
In a way, the best way to describe the show is that this is simultaneously two different types of comedies. One is a quirky office comedy, and the other is a satirical cartoon that delivers social commentary. It is a double-edged sword concept, but they do share the same goal to make the humor a high priority. And in that regard, it kind of works. I'm not saying that it's constantly funny, because there are moments when the gags can end up too predictable or they just fall flat and feel pointless, but when they are effective, they can bring out a good legitimate laugh, rather it be coming from the antics of the personalities.
The rumor is they treat you like a human being, and I would love to be treated like a human being, just once.
Here you go, boy.
The ridiculousness of the situation.
You dare to mock me? I have attained 3 Navy blue belts in office security.
I'm just saying it's hard to believe a thumb can—
Silence! Or you will have to deal with me!
Or coming from the wit of the writing and how smart they can deliver their message.
I'm gonna hang dirty laundry on the walls. Do you want some for your room?
Why would I want that?
See?
I'm not gonna use Dilbert's laundry. I'm gonna buy it in an art gallery. It's framed, expensive dirty laundry.
Can you give me a sock?
And that's actually another part of what makes the good comedy work. How smart the show can actually be. In every episode, they always have something that they want to say. Either if it's regarding the problems with office life and how the dumbest people are also the most powerful in both management and marketing, or when commenting about society and some of the problems in its system, like charity, art, holidays, and even regarding how false facts found on the internet can consume our culture.
What are you doing?
I'm posting false information on the web.
Why?
It's fun. Someone picks up a strand of false information, spreads it around, and before you know it, a panic is created. Then you just sit back and watch the chaos.
Considering how Scott is now, this episode is a true piece of irony. But what is amazing about that element is how the commentary has aged surprisingly well for a show from 1999. Granted, there are moments that are obviously outdated, but thanks to the writing's strong wit, these episodes can be served as good thinking pieces about the small parts in our everyday lives and explain how the more you think about it, the more you realize how messed up and easily corruptible those little things can be. Okay, so the show can have something to say and can be funny about it, but since it is an animated series, how is it as a show? What about the animation and the storytelling? Are they as well crafted as the show's wit? Well, to be honest, they're not great, I can tell you that. They do have good setups for their stories, establishing what the problems are and how Dilbert and sometimes the crew are gonna try to solve them, but they almost always end so abruptly. Sure, there are a few episodes that can feel like they have a proper conclusion, but what usually happens is that they end the same way like the 2021 Oscars. After building up a major situation, it just snaps its fingers at the last minute and leave out a quick explanation to say, okay, everything's back to normal, let's forget this happened and go back to work.
I appreciate your heartfelt sentiments, and with that in mind, I'm decreasing your pay, cutting your benefits, and increasing your hours. Everybody back to work.
That's exactly my point.
As for the animation, I do get that it does its best to stay true to the style of the comics, and I won't say that it looks bad or anything. But the best way I can describe the visuals is that it's the animation equivalent of an office job. It's unpleasantly dull to look at, there's not much colors popping out while looking flat, and it's all pretty stiff with their movements, but can't really complain too much because it does get the job done and serve its purpose. The best animation you can find is, of course, from the intro, which actually did win an Emmy for the title design and has an awesome score by Danny Elfman. That part always looks great, but very rarely does the energy also emerge in the episodes themselves.
Oh, now this is more like it. You're finally treating me like a member of the family.
But like in a real office, it can only be as good as the people who are working there. And of course, part of the job of an office worker is to go and tolerate your coworkers and your bosses as much as you can, regardless of who they might be, of course. Now, sure, in the case of Dilbert, they definitely are a dysfunctional group in that office right there. But I will say that they definitely are the kind that really are worth hanging around with. Well, depending on who they are, of course.
Okay, I'm not gonna say that the cast in general is good. It's a pretty mixed bag where there will be some you'll enjoy and others you wish would just shut up. Chances are, people will have their own takes on who they love and hate, but if I could speak my thoughts, the thing with the cast is that they're all meant to be caricatures. They're not really characters of a TV show in the common sense, but rather they represent the archetypes of the kind of people you meet in an office building. Sure, they can supply a lot of comedy potential, but some can end up going stale real quick and end up becoming one-dimensional by constantly recycling the one joke they have every time they're on screen. This is especially the case with the boss, who is meant to be the dumbest person in the building that is somehow in charge and never uses common sense when making impactful decisions. An obvious contrast to Dilbert being the only reasonable thinking and morally sound character of the series to which the audience see themselves. Despite being one of the main characters of the show, that's his only punchline. He's so stupid to the point of being selfish and arrogant.
What are you doing? He's never been an engineer before.
Oh, how hard could it be? I'm always correcting your work, and I've never been to engineering school.
But again, with the bad ones, there are also some enjoyable characters that help balance things out to deliver strong personalities and make the comedy better. Some of my own notable ones I've enjoyed include Wally, who puts more effort into avoiding any kind of work so he could be as lazy as possible, and Alice, the only female engineer of the group and also the toughest to stand out in the male-dominated industry.
Alice, could you clean up the coffee spill? Our intern has suddenly discovered dignity.
Sure. No problem. I don't mind.
See? She doesn't have a...
There you go.
And then there's Dogbert, who I honestly think he should be the main character of the show. As a successful con man, he emphasizes the series' commentary by presenting how easy it is to manipulate the capitalist system with the episode's subject. Add that with Dogbert's dry sense of sarcastic humor, he is the embodiment of the show's strengths by being smart, unapologetic, and doesn't care of the moral implications of the situation.
A placebo. Now that you told me it's a placebo, it's not going to work.
It will if you think it will.
But I already know it's a placebo.
Maybe it isn't.
You just said it was.
That's precisely the power of the placebo.
I also want to add that another good thing that the show has going for it is the voice acting. A big part of why some of the comedy is effective and that the personalities stand out is through the performances of their respective actors. Granted, there are times when it's noticeable that the show can be a little too dependent on Tom Kenny and Tress MacNeille to voice almost all the non-recurring roles of the show.
How may I be of service to you, higher life forms?
I'm selling overpriced cookies that taste like styrofoam. How many cartons should I put you down for?
You crazy, am I, intern? Well, grab your crap and follow me.
Hurry up, Foster. The polls close in 30 seconds.
Happy birthday, Wally. Blah, blah, blah. Everybody eat cake and see if your morale goes up.
On my salary, I can only afford to take vacations within the building itself.
But at the same time, they do provide some special guests to give out something new for each episode. And since Larry Charles is one of the heads, he managed to bring in Wayne Knight and Jerry Seinfeld to drop by and have Jason Alexander be a part of the cast as Catbert.
Oh, good one. An ostrich could do my job. Very clever. I'm sure you use that cleverness in your challenging job as an engineer.
Who am I? Where were you 3 seconds ago? Get the wax out of your ears, human. A problem, I might add, computers don't suffer from. I am CompuCom, the Magnificent.
Where's your Todd now?
We can all agree that the Dilbert series is not perfect. In fact, it is far from perfect. Like, it has its problems, and they could be quite major. But, to its credit, there are also some strong assets as well that can also make the Dilbert series pretty entertaining to watch at the same time. However, there is one thing I have yet to discuss about, and this is a major thing about the series, and that is regarding its biggest issues. I know I've talked about a lot of problems, but if there is one to really point out, I would say that this one would be the root of all of its problems. Now, remember back when I said earlier that the Dilbert series has a double-edged sword concept? Well, here is the part where the concept also hurts the series.
The biggest problem with Dilbert is actually the concept of trying to be two different types of comedies at once. In theory, that seems pretty reasonable, and it is possible to make it work. But in this case, it doesn't know how to blend the two where they both are debatably nearly opposites. On one hand, you got the office comedy that requires the humor to be relatable to the target demographic, and rely more on the personalities to take the wheel, and the other is the social satire that requires exaggerating the scenarios and make the story about the situation in order to properly deliver the message. And as a cartoon, it doesn't hold back on making their situations completely crazy. What this series does is constantly flip-flop from one style of comedy to the next and have the elements feel improperly cluttered together instead of mixed well. This is why the bad jokes don't land or some characters aren't as good. They feel out of place for the type of comedy that the episode wants to try. It ultimately feels like it doesn't truly know what it wants to be or who the target demographic is. Does it want to be more like The Office, so audiences could see themselves in a relatable character in the same work environment as they're in? Or is it more like The Simpsons and go for a general audience to discuss about the problems in our everyday lives in a humorous way?
Well, I know what I like. You're right. I don't.
The show can do both, and they can do both well, but it cannot do both at the same time. In a way, it shares the same problem as the 2015 Muppet series. It's trying to be two things at the same time, but it fails to blend the Office format with the Muppet formula.
Like an engineer in an office filled with idiots, it wants to go and try to solve as many problems as it can, and it actually does know how to do so efficiently. Unfortunately, the heads at the management of the show has so many different ideas that it wants to do at the same time, and ultimately, they end up biting off more than they could chew, and that's why we end up with so many problems within the show, like how the gags and the characters feel a bit more off-putting than funny, and how some of the plot lines, or the majority of the plot lines, just abruptly end. That they have a massive setup, but then suddenly when it comes to the conclusion, it just solves everything in just like a minute, in just like a little snap like that. But despite all of its flaws, despite the complete malfunctions that it all has, I can't help but find myself actually enjoying the show. That, yeah, I do see a lot of the problems in there, but there is still a part of me that I have laughed a lot of the jokes that are actually funny, and that there's a part of me that kind of does admire how smart it could actually be. But I will say right now that there is still one more thing I have yet to fully discuss about this Dilbert series, and that is regarding the legacy that went on afterwards after the origins of the show. And that is regarding how long the series went for. Or should I say, how short it went for.
Unfortunately, the Dilbert series was short-lived because of one of the most common reasons to a show's demise. And by the way, no, Scott, your show did not get canceled because you were white. Republicans won't be hunted because Biden was elected either. No, the real reason is because of the dreaded schedule change. They had a good thing going with their first time slot on UPN, but then when they changed it for their second season, their viewership plummeted. In Scott's own words, it was on UPN, a network that few people watch. And because of some management screw-ups between the first and second seasons, the time slot kept changing and we lost our viewers. We were also scheduled to follow the worst TV show ever made, Shasta McNasty. On TV, your viewership is 75% determined by how many people watch the show before yours. That killed us. And this ultimately left the show to only have 30 episodes in total. But despite the small lifespan, it resulted in the Dilbert series to be kind of a mixed bag, where just about every element has its great moments and its serious issues. The writing can be clever and contain some smart commentary, but it can also be a mess with poor structure. The comedy can be hilarious, but it doesn't know what kind of comedy it wants to be. Some characters are memorably enjoyable, and others you wish you'd never see them again. And the animation can do the job fine, but nothing to really write about. However, even with all of its imperfections and its problems, I find myself being more appealed to the pros and motivated me to want to watch more. At its worst, it's just a mediocre series. But at its best, it is a smart, funny, and entertaining show that leaves the viewers with a laugh and a thought. If I give this a rating, taking all that into account, I'd go with a 7 out of 10. I know there's some problems, but I'll be remembering more of the good times of when I watched this.
Okay, I'll admit that yes, this is a pretty complicated series to go and analyze, and it really would have been much easier for me to go and say that you should go and watch The Office or Park and Rec instead. We can all agree that those are way bigger and better shows. But then again, there is still a bit of that weird charm to Dilbert that kind of makes me want to go and revisit, or that it is actually worth revisiting, considering that you could tell that there is some kind of thought that was put into the series at the same time as making me laugh and giving me something to think about regarding things that normally many people would just go and take things for granted. It's kind of funny how a show can simultaneously be a genius and absolutely be stupid at the same time. But then again, regardless if you love or hate the show, we can all go and agree on one thing. Better to watch this than to read any of Scott Adams' crazy tweets. See you later, dudes.
Oh well, back to work.